Welcome to another episode on how Lora works with Shelly, where we discuss how to use the Lora communication between Shelly devices that are outside the Wi-Fi range. And I guess time flies when you are having fun, because we are already at episode 7 with this one. And I think I'm going to take this scenario even further by introducing another device to this whole setup. And this is the Shelly BLU humidity and temperature sensor, BLU H&T. Focus, please. Yeah. So the idea today is that we have this remote Shelly, which is, let's say it's outside in a garden controlling gates and lights, or maybe it's in a shed. But since it is there, you also want to use it to measure some other values, for example, temperature and humidity. So this BLU H&T is connected to this Shelly, which is outside the Wi-Fi range, and we are going to communicate the readings of this Shelly, so temperature and humidity. And because this also has a button, we might as well just use the button as well. And then send that information over from Lora to our Shelly 1 Gen 4, which is on the Wi-Fi network. So we will be able to see, all the temperature and humidity values, and also get a notification or create a scene whenever this button gets pushed. So just to summarize the technical details of this solution. So on the Shelly, which in my case is the Shelly 1 Gen 4, which is connected to the Wi-Fi network, we are going to create virtual components for all the metrics and values that we want to bring over from the remote device. And as I said, these metrics can be some metrics of the remote device, like energy readings, power readings, voltage, current, or it can be any value of additional, let's say, Bluetooth devices, in this case the Bluetooth temperature and humidity sensor. So obviously the remote device is connected to this Bluetooth sensor, and then we are just going to use scripts to bring this information over. And the way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to monitor the updates from the Bluetooth sensor, and I'm going to store it, but I'm going to have a separate update routine for Lora. Because if you remember the first video that I did on the whole Lora communication, I said that you need to take the airtime into consideration, and I want to make sure that we are not transmitting too much information over Lora. So the Bluetooth sensor, I think it sends readings every 10 minutes, or if there are bigger changes, then even more frequently. But now what I'm going to do with Lora is that the Lora is only going to send updates every hour. So we are just going to have less resolution. So we have to store the latest readings on the remote Shelly, and then send the latest information over Lora every hour. But before we can do that, we have to set up the Bluetooth device. And in order to do that, you have to go to components, and under this section here, so we are going to create on the other device, we are going to create virtual components. But here under the components, you have this option to link any Bluetooth devices. So you can press the, the plus button, and then it's going to search for Bluetooth devices. In my case, because the Shelly BLU H&T has a button, I can press that button in order to wake up the device. And you can see that I have a BLU H&T, and if I go into the details, that it has a couple of metrics, so battery, humidity, temperature, and a button. And I mean, I can change the name, especially if you have multiple of these Bluetooth devices, you can give them separate names, but that's pretty much it. And probably the only other important thing to remember is that when you come back to the home screen, these devices or these metrics appear here as well, and you can go into the settings, and here this is where you can see the ID of the devices. So the humidity is called BT Home Sensor :201, and the temperature is called BT Home Sensor :202, and the button is called, well, the button doesn't have an ID, but we are going to see how that ID looks like when we press the button. We will need these IDs when we create the code later on, so that's why it is important. So first of all, what I want to show you is I'm going to make modification to this Lora remote script. I'm just going to expand on the previous examples, but I also created 2 more scripts which you can also use to debug and see what events and status updates are being sent by various devices, because the BLU, let's say, distance is probably going to send different type of information. And also I discussed it in a previous video that button presses are events. So if I have this very simple script and I start this and I clear the console, and if I press the button on the blue, then it sends this information, and then you can see what information is sent by the blue button. So in the info object component, BT home device :200. So that's the ID of this Bluetooth button, and you can see that there is an event which is called a single push. It is very similar to how the Shelly sends events when you press the button on the input, the physical input of the Shelly as well. So I'm going to include this event handler and also the status handler. Sorry, what's the other one? The status handler in my example files, which you will find in the video description, because that also helps you to to see the messages. Because then, based on these messages, we will need to modify the script, how to capture them. Okay, but let's now go back to the Lora remote, and the first changes I'm making here is in the beginning of the script, I created some additional variables, because as I said, what we are going to do is we are going to listen to all the status updates that the BLU H&T sends us in terms of temperature and humidity updates, and we are going to store it. So we need some variables to store it. So I created a BT temp and a BT humidity variables, and the default value is just 0. And I also created a BT transmit variable, which I'm going to set it to true every time I receive an update from the Bluetooth sensor. So this is just some declarations that I had to do in the beginning. And if you're using a different type of sensor, you might want to create variables which are called differently. Or if you have two humidity and temperature sensors, then it's going to be BT temp 1 or 2, or you can give it a more meaningful name as well. And then we have to scroll down, because we already have in this the remote script we didn't have a status handler before, so I created a new status handler, and it's almost like the status handler example that I just showed you previously. So I commented out the the debug message, so I'm not going to print the information for the console log. You can use the other example for that if you want to look at the details. But basically we are going to look at the status handlers, and when the Bluetooth temperature sensor sends an update, then it's going to send in the status.component, it's going to say BT home sensor 202. So again, if you remember when we looked at before, so that was the ID of the temperature sensor, and the humidity sensor was BT home sensor 201. And also in the if statement, I included that there is a status.delta object where the update is going to be sent. So if this sensor is sending an update or a status update, or this sensor is sending a status update, then we are going to store the information, and the actual new temperature or new humidity readings is coming in the status.delta.value attribute. So we are just going to put it into the corresponding variables. So BT temp equals the status.delta.value, and then we set the BT transmit to true, which just means that we have an update from the Bluetooth sensor. And then we also do the same with the humidity. And this is why I said you can look at these status update messages or that status handler example, just put it in as a script, you start it, and then you look at the console messages and see what type of messages are coming from the various sensors or the devices. And this is why I wanted to include this, because, for example, this is a status update from the 2 p.m. because it has power management, and you can see that it has the component is called the switch 1, so that's the first so actually that's the second output, because switch 0 is the first output. So if you have a Shelly 1 p.m. there is only going to be switch :1. But here in the delta you can see all the different values, for example, energy, current, frequency, power factor, returned energy, the power. So these are voltage, for example. So these are all the different variables that you can also capture in the status handler. So you just have to create a separate if where the the component is something else, and then the value is going to be, for example, here the status dot delta, which is an object, and let's say power or a power. So that's going to be the current power output. And then you can send that over and then just create a different virtual component for that. So it's going to be very similar to how you would handle the temperature and the humidity in this case. And again, if you have multiple temperature and humidity sensors, then it's going to be probably BT home sensors 203, 204, 205, 206, and so on. But I showed you how to look that up, so it should be fairly straightforward. So here, when we received an update from those Bluetooth sensors, we are just going to store them in these variables. And then we are going to set the transmit to true, which means that, we have some new data. So when it's time to send, we can send this information over. And finally, here I've added this new piece of code, which is a timer and a timer handler. So let me start with this timer handler. I just need to change the text here. So if you want to create a piece of logic in Shelly which executes on a regular basis, you create a timer. So in order to create a timer, you call timer.set, and the first variable 3,600,000 is 1 hour in milliseconds. So that's going to create an update every hour. True means reoccurring. The BLU update means that it's going to call the BLU update function every time the timer is triggered, and we are not passing any values over. And then the BLU function, it basically just says if BT transmit, so it means that if we have received an update from the Bluetooth sensor since the last time we transmitted, because let's say the battery is dead in this Bluetooth sensor, then we don't want to keep retransmitting the same value over and over because the value hasn't changed, so there's no point doing that. But if there is a BT transmit, so we have new data to transmit, we are just going to send a message like sending BT H&T update, and then we send a message and we send a letter E followed by the temperature value, and then we send the letter F followed by the humidity value. So, and as you can see on the other side, like E 23.9, so that's the 23.9 degrees centigrade, and the F 46 is 46%. So these are the messages that we are sending over. And again, let's say if you would have multiple sensors, then you can just expand to different letters for the temperature and the humidity readings of those sensors. And that's pretty much it. So again, we receive the data from the temperature and the humidity sensor. In this case, we store it, and then we have a separate timer which picks up these values and sends it over in a different interval over Bluetooth. Over Lora. Sorry, I just opened up the airtime utilization. So when we send the temperature reading, so that's like usually like 4 digits for the temperature and then an additional letter. So that's like 5 letters for the payload. And for the 1% utilization, that comes out 24 messages per hour. So you can technically go down like every 15 minutes. And again, just keep in mind, we are sending 2 messages every time because we are sending 1 for temperature and 1 for humidity. Maybe I could combine the 2 of them into one because the overhead for each Lora message is the same, but I think we are well within the the reasonable limits, and probably you will be using this for places where you don't want to have such a high frequency updates anyway. But it's really up to you. Just keep this in mind, how much message you can send every hour to be within the 1% duty cycle. Okay, so that's the sending part, or the remote device already done. It has all the functions and it's running, and it's going to put all these messages into the log. You will see that we receive a lot more updates, and we are sending the Lora messages much less frequently because of this timer thing. And actually there is one more thing which I haven't mentioned. Since the BLU H&T has a button, I thought, why we might as well just send this button information over so you can use this button for something. But actually that is a very simple thing to use, because in the previous video we had this doorbell example. And so we pushed a button, the physical button on the 2 p.m. to create a doorbell message. And we are going to do the same for this Bluetooth button as well. So if you see the code here, let me scroll up so we have a little bit more, space to look at. So, buttons are events, so that's going to be handled in the event handler. And we had this piece of code for the button press. So it was a single push on the input one. So that was the second button on the 2 p.m. And now this is going to be again a single push on the BT home device :200. So that's the ID of the button on the on the BLU H&T. So it works exactly the same way. It's that the component is going to have a different name. Instead of the input, let's say :0 or input :1, it's BT home device :200. And I've only implemented a single push here, but you might want to send different messages and then handle double push or a long press on the BT button as well. And we are just sending a message D over. So, previously C was for the doorbell and D was for, that's the next letter, that's for the Bluetooth button. So let's look at how we handle it on the gateway side. And for that, we have to create virtual components first. So I go into the virtual components and I created one button for the Bluetooth push button, and I created two numbers, one for humidity and one for temperature. So the Bluetooth button is very simple. Yeah, it's just a button type, and I given it a separate icon. So you can go to icon8.com and then just pick up an icon, and then you can copy the URL for it. So icon8, like that's the humidity that for example, you pick this button, and then you do copy link to PNG, and then you paste that into your here. The only other thing I changed is I changed the color to FFFF because the default color of these icons were black, and black doesn't work on black, so I changed it to FFFFF, which is white. And then as I said, the number is created for temperature and humidity. And I just set temperature, and I set this to label because obviously I don't want to change the temperature here. It doesn't make sense. So that's temperature. I put some values in, a unit, default value, and an icon. So simple as that. And the similar for the humidity. So it's a label type, minimum, maximum values, the unit is percentage, and it has a different icon. And once I've created that, I've also added them to this virtual group that we created in the previous example. So now when I go to the home screen, I see the button, the temperature, and the humidity as well. And I already see the values that are shown here. So now I can create scenes, actions based on these figures. Well, besides just looking them on the phone app. So now we are going to go into the script, and we are going to modify this Lora virtual gateway script, same script as we used before. And all we need to do now is we need to go into the event handler, because these are going to be Lora messages. The Lora messages appear as events. And we already had a lot of stuff implemented here. So the last time that we made some code changes here was to handle the doorbell message, which was C. So I quickly copy and pasted and pretty much done the same for the the Bluetooth button. So which sends a message, sends a text D over Lora. And if this happens, then I create a button trigger with the ID 202. So that's the ID of the Bluetooth button on the components. So again, if I go back to the components, Bluetooth button 202, but we only have to use the ID here, so 202. And I generate a single push event. And then again, you can use scenes or actions to do something like I did in the previous video. So this is why the ID is 202 and the event is going to be single push. Okay, so that's fine. And then moving on, we also have to handle the incoming messages on the temperature and the humidity update. So first we are going to check whether the first letter of the message is E, because those are going to be the temperature updates. So the decrypted message substring 01, that's the first letter. If that equals to E, then we need to do a very similar thing. So on the buttons, we can trigger an event, But on the number types, we can just set the value. So we are going to call the number.set function, and we have to pass an ID. Again, you get the ID similarly how you get the ID for the buttons. And then we basically just take the rest of the message from the second characters. So I said like, index 1, first character is 0, second character is 1, to the next 100 characters. It's never going to be 100, but I just put 100. And I convert it to a float number because, temperature is going to be with 1 decimal places. And that's basically just put the value into that virtual component that we see on the main screen. And we send a message that, BT temperature update received. And very similarly, we can process the humidity readings. So that starts with the letter F. And then we again do a number set, but the ID for the virtual component for the humidity is 201. And then the value is going to be very similar to the previous one. So that's basically parsing the value from the second character of the message. And then we again just put a message into the log saying that the BLU humidity update received. And you see some of these examples here. So like E23.9 and F46. And basically that's it. So after this, and of course you start the script and you make sure that the script is enabled on startup, you will start having those readings transferred over to this main Shelly. And now because it's on the Shelly, which is on the Wi-Fi, and in the app, you can see all these values on the mobile phone as well. So just to show you, so that's my Shelly app. So this is the Gen 1 where we have the virtual components. If I go into this component screen, I can see those values here. And then on video, I think it was video 3 when we created a group for that and we exposed that group. So if I go back to, I have a virtual group here, which shows up as a separate device. So I have all the different buttons that I created for the previous video examples, but you can see that we have the temperature and the humidity showing here. And now you can, if you want to create any scenes, so create a scene and then add the condition and then device based and then the test room, scroll all the way down to Lora. Then you have all these different values. So you have the Bluetooth button, you have the temperature and the humidity. So if you want to do something with the temperature, less than, greater than, equal to, you can create a scene just like if this device would be connected within the Wi-Fi network. So this process makes it completely transparent to the Shelly app where this device actually sits. I mean, the only basically small thing is that even though physically it is connected to the Shelly 2 PM, but because it's not on the Wi-Fi, you are not going to see it in the app on the devices. Or if you have, if you have assigned them to the, to initially, then it's going to show offline because it's not on the Wi-Fi network. But we are bringing all this information over to another device, which is on the Wi-Fi network. So you will see all these values and events and devices associated to that device. So you're going to have this one Shelly Lora device, which has a lot of additional components through all the virtual stuff that we are bringing over from Lora. But again, once you start creating scenes, it doesn't really matter whether it comes from a physical component or a physical device or a virtual component or virtual device. And that pretty much concludes this episode. As usual, you are going to find the links in the video description, which includes all the examples that I've shown you up until now, which at this point contains everything that we have done in the seven episodes. So you can just easily, copy and paste the code. Again, keep in mind that you have to double check those IDs, because if you have more devices or, a different type of Shelly, sometimes the IDs change. So just make sure that you are, checking the IDs whenever you are creating the virtual components. For example, I created temperature and humidity. If you create humidity first, that's going to be, ID 200 and temperature is going to be 201. So just make sure that you double check all these IDs where I pointed out in the code. But that should be all. You should be up and running in no time. So I hope you find this video useful. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you in the next one.